Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today with our speaker, James Martinet, who's going to be explaining to us about the biochemistry of foods, specifically fats and lipids, to get a better understanding of that. And James has his degree from Princeton University in biology and studied at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, holds a PhD in pathology and neuroimmunology. He's been teaching for 15 years, over 15 years, teaching biology and science courses for biology majors, pre-health career majors, and also non-science majors, which is helpful in explaining complex concepts to people like us. He also has a military experience in the U.S. Navy, where you worked exactly. What did you? I know that you had worked with
biowarfare and pandemic response, which
right,
is very contemporary. Yes.
right, and you also said that your passion is in science fluency, right?
Yes, literacy. Yes.
Literacy, science literacy. So again, explaining some
Mm.
uh, complex concepts in a way that's easy to understand. So I want to thank you for being here, and I'd like to introduce Dr. James Martinet.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me again. As I mentioned earlier, again, my goal is to not dumb down the information, but just to simplify it. I truly believe if you know the science, then you can make your own decisions. So basically, that's my goal, to make you a science consumer. I've been doing a lot of COVID talks lately, so it's good to take a break and talk about food. Um, so we did carbohydrates, and now we're going to talk about fats. And this is our hopefully our goal. We'll go through most of these points today. There's few enough of us that if you have questions, just type them in the chat box. I can read it, or just interrupt me nicely, and I'll just answer questions as they come up. Um, well, basically, when it comes to fats, I'm sure you have seen all these terms: saturated, unsaturated, omega, trans fats, all that stuff. So basically, we're going to spend most of our time today is just learning what those are. We have something in science that is called structure function. Think architecture, construction. The form follows the function. So that's very true for fats. If you understand the structure of a fat, you understand what all those terms in red mean. So what we're going to do is actually learn the structure of a fat, because once you have that building block, then all these terms make sense to you. Okay, that's what we're going to be doing. I'm sure that you have seen some of these terms actually on Dr. Benito Herrera. I can say that, I can roll my R's. In her last webinar, she mentioned some of them, like good and bad cholesterol, LDL, all that stuff. So I'm gonna just try all that in the few minutes that we have today. So anyway, so that's the plan for today. I always like to start with big picture. I don't have to tell you that you are what you eat. Okay, and basically it's a zero-sum game. We eat large molecules, fats, carbohydrates, etc., etc. We break them down. Fancy term is catabolism. But the point they're trying to make here is that that's where you get your calories. So if you don't break it down, you get no money. That's what I like to use as an analogy. Calories is money. Money that you use to make new cells that you need to move, to maintain your body temperature, to grow hair, not in my case anymore, but whatever, to do anything you need as a human being. And everything else is waste. Okay, that could be good waste like fiber, or it could be bad waste like toxins. But I want you to think that everything that comes in has two choices. It becomes calories or waste. That's it. Okay, so that's going to be important when we talk about other places that fat can end up, which is, of course, in terms of not good for you. All right, so this I showed last time. I don't know how many of you were here for the, well, besides Mario, the carbohydrate talk, but does anybody remember what this molecule is? You put it in your car, unless you're driving an electrical car. This is gasoline. and that's a hydrocarbon. So what I want you to see is that the C part, that's just carbon atom. This is how we write in chemistry. And they hang out with a lot of H's, which are hydrogens. So hydrocarbon, this is gasoline, this is propane, this is all the fuels that we use. And that tells you that they have a lot of energy. So actually, you add a little bit of oxygen to this, and we have starch. We have carbohydrates. Okay, that's what we learned last time we were around. Okay, so every time you cut here, those little lines there are chemical bonds. Every time you cut this, you get money. That's the way to think about it. Doesn't matter if it's your car, your barbecue propane, or the stuff that you eat. Every time you break this, you get calories, you get money. That's what we do. That's catabolism. All right. So that's what they're called, hydrocarbons. Now, when we talk about sugars and carbohydrates, we learned that we added oxygen to this ugly molecule so they could be water soluble. It would be like water. Good. Now, the problem with fats, this is it. This is it for fats. There's no oxygen there. They are hydrophobic, is what we call them. I want you to think of them as oil. They don't mix with water. And that basically underlines all the problems that we have with high cholesterol, with different types of lipids and so on. The fact that they are oil, they don't mix with water. All right, so let's move on. More people are coming in, good. You have seen this term before, fatty acids, okay? Now, let me go back a second quickly. This is gasoline, this is energy. Look at a fatty acid. It is exactly like gasoline. It is a hydrocarbon, that's what you eat. I mean, you don't eat gasoline, but you eat this, very highly energetic. And now you know one of the answers for today, why you get so many more calories out of fats, is because they have all these places that you can break and get money from. They're highly energetic, they're highly caloric. Now, another thing that I want you to get from this is you see this term fatty acids. And again, if I say a term that you're not familiar with, immediately raise your hand, put it in the chat box, because I don't want to say anything that you do not know, okay? Now, confuses a lot of people because when most people think of an acid, you think acid in your battery, in your stomach, hydrochloric acid. So why do we call this type of fats fatty acids? And the answer is just a very nerdy one. If you're an organic chemist and you see that structure, you don't know, I'm not gonna quiz you so you don't have to learn names. But if you had that structure, you're called an acid. Okay, sounds kind of weird, but that's what we call these fats fatty acids because they have that, but they're not acid. They're not the types of acids that you see in tomatoes, in lemons that give you that acidity to those foods. This is something completely different. It's one of my pet peeves as to why they're called acids. All right, so you do not eat a fatty acid, you eat a fat, okay? So now the next thing we're going to learn is what's the relationship between this very energetic molecule and the fats that you eat. And the answer is very simple. You put three of them together, like the letter E. Let's say you have think of like a Velcro or a Lego block that has three little places where you can put three fatty acids. That's it, that's what you eat. That's what we call a fat, okay? So let's see how that looks. I know this is kind of ugly, but this is just your hydrocarbon. Every time you see a carbon, again, that's money in your pocket. That's energy, that's calories. This is your glycerol. You don't have to know that term either, but that's what keeps all the fatty acids together. But there's one thing I want to show you here. This OH group, this is very chemically reactive. On Dr. Benito's lecture, you heard about those AGEs, advanced glycation products that came out of sugars, is because of this group, okay? If you remember, there's no reason you should remember this, but from the carbohydrate and sugar talk, if you look at this is actually half a glucose, half a sugar. And we learned then that the reason that high blood glucose is bad for you is because this part of the molecule reacts with everything. And that's where you get all the diseases or the pathology that you get from diabetes or from just having high blood glucose. So it's no different here. And these are also the things in sugars that react and give you those AGEs or AGEs that Dr. Benito was talking about. But they disappear. Your fatty acid sticks to here, sticks here, sticks here, and you're done. And you have a fat. That's what you eat. That will be butter. That will be whatever you're eating. Okay, so it's gonna get uglier before it gets prettier. So this is really ugly. Okay, but all there is three of these guys. 1, 2, 3 fatty acids. I show you this because you have seen these terms, triglycerides. You go to your annual physical and you get your blood work done, and they measure your triglycerides. They're measuring how much fat is in your blood. That's actually what they're doing. So when you see that term, they're showing you this. This is what you're eating. I'm going to simplify this in a second. So you cannot sleep tonight, just count the carbons and you'll sleep, but it's like sheep. You'll sleep before you get to the end. Okay. But this is what we eat. Okay. So the only difference between saturated, unsaturated, omega-3s, all trans fats and all, it's not how they're put together. The difference is going to be somewhere in here. Okay. Everything is a triglyceride. Okay. So just keep that in mind. All right, so now we have our building block. This is the stuff that we eat. Let's see what else we can learn from this, okay? I want you to look at this, just 2 happy carbons. Just see again, carbon atom, that's all you need to know. And they hold hands together. They're very nice. They get along together with each other. They get along well. And the H's are hydrogens, okay? So each carbon is going to be with 2 hydrogens. Okay. Now the reason I'm showing you this is because we call this saturation. When you cannot put any more hydrogens into those carbons, you're done. You cannot take it anymore. You're saturated. And that's what we call a saturated fat. I'm sure you have seen that term before, saturated fat. Now, I want you to look at this molecule and again think, every time you break one of these bonds, you get money, you get calories, okay? So now you can see why saturated fats gives you so much calories, because they have all these little lines that you break and they give you calories, they give you money, okay? So this is a saturated fat. All right, let's move on. And sorry, the way we draw structures, that's not the shape they have in real life. And I mentioned at the beginning that to really understand fats, saturated, unsaturated, omegas, trans fats, all that stuff, we have to look at this shape. We have to look at that structure. So basically what we're going to look is we're going to look at something called space-filling models. That's just a fancy term. It's just how they look in real life, okay? So let me just walk you how that is. Okay, here's what we've been looking at. This is your saturated fatty acid. We're gonna take instead of the symbols, we're actually gonna make actual atoms with the space that they occupy. And you end up like this, okay? This is the actual shape of a saturated fatty acid, okay? What I want you to think is, think of yourself either with your arms against your body, so you're very compact, or you have an arm out, or your arm is straight, now you're bending your elbow. So we're going to see that those are the changes that actually change the type of fat that you're eating. Again, it's not how many of them are stuck into that building block, but this part, the shape of them, okay. All right, so we went from this ugliness to this one, which almost looked like a little Christmas ornament. So that's a better one to look at, okay. Now, I want you to think about this saturated fat. It looks like this, okay? So that means that you have your hands or your arms against your body. So that means that I can pack more of you on the same space. I mean, not now that we're in the pandemic, you know, social distance, but I can put more of you on the same space, okay? So your saturated fats, you're going to be a solid. You're going to be butter because I can put more of you on the same space. Now this structure here is basically a much beautiful version than this ugliness here because it's exactly the same. But in order for me not to give you a headache, I got rid of all the carbons, all the letters. But this is exactly what I showed you before. And here's your space filling model. So again, you can put a lot of them together in the same place, and that way you have a solid. Just think of water. If you lower the temperature, more molecules get together, you have ice. Increase temperature, the molecules space each other a little bit more, liquid. The more you space yourself, then you can become a gas. So saturated fats, not only you have more calories because there's more lines to cut, there's more molecules on the same spot, okay? And that's what I say, the more bonds, more calories, and those are the fats that we associate with animal fats. So I'm sure that all of you have heard that animal fats are not that good for you, saturated fats not that good for you. This is one of the reasons. They contain a lot of calories on the same space. So anybody know if saturated fats are the quote unquote not as good fats? What are the good fats for you if not saturated? Take a guess.
Unsaturated.
There you go, unsaturated. So what we're going to learn next is what does that mean? Okay. Again, very simple. There's a lot of information here. One's not supposed to come back all at once, but that's fine. This is a space filling model. This is palmitate or palmitic oil. You've seen that before. And here are two carbons. Again, they're saturated. Okay, they have 2 hydrogen each. So what we have to do to make an unsaturated fatty acids is very simple. We get rid of the hydrogens. So let's do that. Bam, gone. Okay, so look at these 2 carbons here. They lost a hydrogen. Okay, so sorry that it looks kind of blurry, but there are 2 lines here, 2 bonds. There's a double bond. Now you are not saturated with hydrogens, which means you're unsaturated fat. Okay, so it's very simple, very straightforward. Now, there's 2 very important parts that I'm gonna say next. It explains why trans fats are bad for you, explains the whole thing about the omega fatty acids, explains everything about good versus bad cholesterol and so on. And that has to do with this, okay? The first part is that it introduces a bend into the structure. Now you're standing up, but you're sticking an arm out or you're bending your elbow. You're taking more space, which means I can put less molecules on the same amount of space, okay? The second important point is that the 2 hydrogens left are on the same side. And the fancy term that we have in chemistry for that is cis, okay? This is natural. This is what you see in nature, okay? The reason I give you this term is probably some of you are guessing by now is because if they're not on the same side, they will be trans, and that will be a trans fat. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes, okay? But this is nature. This is what you see. Now think about it again. Now you have your arms out. I can pack less of you in the same space. So what are you going to be? An oil, okay? So unsaturated fats are going to be liquid, are going to be oils. And that's why you hear that oils or unsaturated fats are better for you, okay? So on the same amount of space, there's going to be less molecules. But there's something else that's, that is equally more important. This one here is saturated. So every time I break one of these lines, I get money, I get calories, I get energy. But here's what happens with the double bonds. I get money, I get calories, I get calories. Once I get to the double bond, those double bonds are too strong. I actually had to spend money to break them. So instead of getting like 10 bucks, 10 bucks, 10 bucks, I get to the double bond, I had to pay 20 bucks to break that double bond and then keep going. So an oil would actually give me less calories because I'm spending calories breaking those double bonds. So that's another reason that those unsaturated fats are much better for you. Again, the 2 reasons are less molecules on the same amount of space, and also the double bonds, you have to spend money, spend energy, spend calories to break them instead of just getting them for free. So of course, all a matter also of how much you put in. If you're like my mother-in-law, there's no amount of olive oil that it's enough when you're cooking. So that sort of defeats the purpose, but that's the reason that you hear that unsaturated fats and oil fats are better for you. Less calories, simple as that. And you find them in plants and fish. Oh, typo. This is supposed to be unsaturated. I apologize for that. Fix it for the next before. I'll fix it before I send you the slides. So plants or fish have unsaturated fats, and that's why they're better for you. Okay, so now you understand the difference between saturated and unsaturated, why unsaturated are better for you. Now, we heard that on the webinar, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, about the omega fatty acids. So you may be thinking, okay, how does an omega fatty acid, that omega fits into any of this? Actually, an omega fatty acid is an unsaturated fat, okay? So it is, oh, here it is. What's an omega fatty acid? It is simply an unsaturated fat. But where does the omega come from? And I'll show you the structure in a second. Omega, as you know from Greek, alpha omega means the end or the last one. That's a very fancy way of saying just the last carbon on the chain, okay? And then the number tells you where you had the double bond. So let's look at a couple of examples. These are the most popular ones, the ones that we all eat, and some of you may even take as supplements. So here's linoleic acid. This is the one that you find in like peanuts and legumes and so on. You may have seen that term before. And this is the first, this is the last, this is the omega carbon, because it's the last one. You start counting here. So this is the omega carbon. So you count, okay, where is the double bond? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons away, omega-6 fatty acid. So those fancy omega terms is simply telling you where is the double bond. So the sixes are the ones that you find mostly in plants. And this is an example of linoleic acid. That's the most common one in fish and fish oils. So those are the omega-3s. So as omega-3 means, here's your omega fatty, omega carbon. 1, 2, 3, there's a double bond. So omega-3. If you see omega-3, 6, means that it has on the 3 and the 6, okay? So it's basically telling you that you are an unsaturated fatty acid. The other ones that you may have heard about, I'm not gonna give you the names because they're long, horrible names, but it's DHA and EPA. Those are the ones that you find in the supplements. So when you're taking those omega supplements, they're gonna contain some of this, or a lot of this. Again, I'm circling the omega or the last carbon, and you see they're all omega-3s because the third carbon is the one with the double bond, okay? If you see something like this, those horrible numbers, it's only telling you 22, how many carbons on the chain. The 6 tells you how many double bonds, and the 3 is telling you there's an omega-3. Okay, so you ever are at your supplement store or looking online, you're trying to decode what all these fats or lipids means, that's how you do it. It tells you the number of carbons and what they are, okay? So in terms of the omega-3s, there's a lot of papers in peer-reviewed journals that have been published. I'm sure you all know that seafood-rich diets protects against heart disease and cardiovascular disease as a result of those fatty acids. And actually, it does. I didn't post all the papers here for save you time, but actually, it does make a difference also in terms of numbers. So even if you substitute 1 meat meal per week for 1 fish meal, it does make a difference in terms of cardiovascular health. Okay, you can go to 3, 4 at some point. You know, there's no more benefit you can accrue, but even one small change in your diet, just one swap of a meal from meat to fish makes a difference in cardiovascular disease. The supplements also give you benefits in terms of cardiovascular, but not as much as the real food. And not real, just food, not real food. And that is because of the concept of bioavailability that was also mentioned in Dr. Benito's webinar. And what this means is that if you're eating anything that is not soluble in water, anything that is not a sugar or a carb, it will not dissolve in water. You have to remember that your blood is basically water. So usually it's complex with something else. And that's what we call bioavailability. If your iron levels are low, you eat your liver, you eat meat, you eat beans, you eat foods rich in iron. But if you take iron supplement, you have to take like 50 to 80 times the dose of what's in the food because it's not bioavailable. Okay, so again, as you look at your supplements, as you look at ways to, when you're buying this stuff, check the bioavailability, like how much of that stuff actually is going to make it into your tissues. Anyway, there's help with other conditions. Rheumatoid arthritis is something that's been shown to help with the fish oils and the omega-3s and so on. It's very important for fetal growth and development, but every time you say or mention eating fish to pregnant women, that's an oxymoron. You have to be a woman to be pregnant, but anyway, beware the mercury, because there's a lot of places in the world, including the Hudson River, in which there's a lot of mercury and heavy metals. And certain fish like salmon tend to accumulate mercury. And mercury is a really bad toxin, very scientific term, very bad toxin, that can interfere with nerve development and brain development. So you have to make sure that your fish is free of mercury. I also saw somewhere that somebody made a link with prostate cancer. But I look at the literature and it's inconclusive, so I wouldn't worry about that. All right. Any questions about saturated, unsaturated, omega, fatty acids? I know that I'm going quickly, so for once I finish on time. There's more stuff, but.
So how or where do you check the bioavailability of, I guess, foods?
Actually, that's a good question because there's no obvious answer. The longer answer is that because if it's a supplement, if it's a cosmetic, if it's something that is not a medicine, all they have to do by law, whoever's making them, is put the ingredients in the order of concentration. Okay, but they don't have to tell you anything about the bioavailability. So I actually go online and look at papers that have tried those. For example, there was a study by the NIH a couple of years ago that showed they were looking at vitamins from many different sources. And they found that only the ones that sold through Puritan Pride, and I forgot the second one, may have been the Costco brand, Kirkland, actually contained the amount of bioavailable vitamin that they were listing in their label. Okay, so you have to kind of, and I have no stock in either of those companies or anything. So, but that's, yeah, it's not, and there's been some attempts to make it a regulation that you have to put it on your label, how much of that is bioavailable, but has been some pushback. So it's not available, no pun intended, that information is not available. So you have to kind of dig into the literature. So it's a good question. All right, now that we know about fats, the next part is the ugliest of them all, which is trans fats or hydrogenated oils. You may have heard that term before. So again, we have to look at the structure and see what that stuff is so bad for you. I'm sure you have seen this term before, maybe hydrogenated fats in the context of something that is synthetic, artificial, and not good for you. And basically, again, we go back to this structure. This is your double bond with the two hydrogens on the same side. Unsaturated fat, this is butter. Sorry, not butter, this is oil. Olive oil that you're putting on your salad or whatever. And hydrogenated fat simply means, here you go, you're adding hydrogen. You're making an unsaturated fat saturated with hydrogens. So now you have butter. Now you have a solid. So at this point, you may ask, okay, what's the big deal? Why are hydrogenated fats bad for you? The problem is that this process is made industrially, is done artificially, it's synthetic. And anybody that's done chemistry, you know that when you're doing a synthetic reaction, you have byproducts, other things that happen. It's like you're cooking and there's a couple potatoes on the side that kind of burn, you have these side products. One of them is our friend, or not friend, trans fats, okay? Now look here, you had the two carbons, you had the double bond, but you see how the hydrogens are on different sides? We call that in chemistry trans, or across. So those hydrogens are across from each other. They're not on the same side, they're not cis. This is synthetic, this is not nature, okay? Let me just put it here. So again, if they are on the same side, cis, That's your natural fats. You have enzymes. Your biology, your metabolism can recognize this. You have to spend money to break that bond, but you can recognize it, okay? Across, trans fats is synthetic. And here's the key, one of the two key parts of why trans fats are bad for you. Your body doesn't recognize this. So when your enzymes are cutting here and getting calories, cutting here and getting calories, they get here and they stop. They cannot do anything with a trans fat. And remember that, again, you eat, you digest, and then your food goes into the blood, and then it gets dispersed to various parts of your body. Now you have this chunk of oil, remember this is like an oil, in your water slash blood. So it has to go somewhere. So that's one of the reasons that trans fats are bad for you, because you can't break this down, okay? Now, there's a second thing that happens, and here I've seen other webinars, people put in pictures of food, so I'll do the same. Also to make you hungry, it's getting to that time of the day. So here's your saturated fats, again, your cheeses, dairies, meat, so on, so on. Natural unsaturated fats with a bend in this structure, and you have your oils, fish, yummy avocado, you had some earlier, and so on. And here are your trans fats. And now you see the other difference between trans fats and unsaturated fats. This guy is straight. Now you can pack those molecules together. So trans fats, even though they have double bonds, they're solids. And that's what you can make so many. This is like my younger daughter's diet at the beginning of her life. Now she's eating better. But that's why you can deep fry so much and so efficient with trans fats, because they're going to be solid. So you have your donuts, your pizza, and be hungry here or here, not down here. Okay. So it's not that the food is made out of trans fats, is that you cook them in the trans fats and they get impregnated with the trans fats. All right. Now, why are trans fats bad for you? And again, this was mentioned on Dr. Benito's webinar. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? Whatever it was, 2 days ago, I think, yesterday. And you saw this phrase, they increase your bad cholesterol or LDLs, and they lower your good cholesterol HDLs. But what do fatty acids have to do with A, cholesterol, and B, what is it about good or bad? So what's the connection between this here and cholesterol? And the last thing we're going to learn today is going back to what I said over the first 5 minutes, that lipids are oils. They don't mix with water. So when you eat your lipids, when you eat your food with fats, they cannot simply go into your blood like sugars, carbohydrates, amino acids, electrolytes. They literally go into a little bus, a structure that looks like a bus. They get into the bus and then they go to other parts of your body. Okay, so we have to learn that next. This is the molecule of cholesterol. It's a beautiful molecule. The person who finally figured it out a few decades ago won the Nobel Prize. You don't have to memorize it, but I like it, so I always show it. It is hydrophobic. Again, a fancy word for saying it will not dissolve in water. Okay, so here's a trick question. What's the difference between good and bad cholesterol? This is cholesterol. And the answer is actually none. Cholesterol is cholesterol is cholesterol. The difference between good or bad is how is it transported in your body, what bus they get into in terms of transportation. Now, a little segue. We are animals. I always tell my students when I call them animals, I thought that's a term of endearment. If I call you a plant, that's bad news. But we animals, we need cholesterol and we make cholesterol, okay? We need to stabilize the membranes that surround our cells, blah, blah, you don't need to know that. But what's really interesting, those of us of a certain vintage, a couple of you maybe of my vintage or so, we remember when people came with the idea that all cholesterol was bad. And if you ate like one egg, you were going to die, okay? And it took a few years for people to figure out that it wasn't the amount of cholesterol, but where is it? And that's what the concept of good versus bad cholesterol comes from. It's not how much you have, but where is it? What bus did it take? That's what the trans fats are changing. What bus is being taken by the cholesterol. So let's meet the bus. Okay, this is basically what I mentioned. So here are the buses. Again, they look fuzzy, which is good because they look complicated and you don't need to know anything about them. But they have some protein. They're literally, I mean, when I use the term bus, they are buses. And then you pack the inside of the bus with cholesterol and fats. And then they get moved through your body in the blood, and then they go to the tissues that need them. Okay. So we have the good bus, high density lipoprotein, HDL. Again, once you learn how things are named, the mistake sort of goes away. Scientists like to name things kind of hyperbolic at times so we sound intelligent, but not really. So this just tells you what it is lipids and proteins put together. That's it, okay? Nothing fancy about that. Now, density, what to know about density is not weight, okay? Think of a pound of steel and a pound of feathers. They weigh the same, 1 pound, but the pound of steel is a lot more compact. So that is density. That's the only thing I want you to know about density. So if you have a lot of good proteins, like the bus is nice, AC, with Wi-Fi, everything, and just a little bit of fat, you are high density. You're good, okay? Now, if more and more fat gets into that bus, fat has a lower density than proteins. So basically, not only the bus gets more crowded, but actually becomes low density, okay? Which means that there's more fat than protein. Your bus is overcrowded with fats. That's a bad bus. If it's really a lot of fat, it can get VLDL, V for very low density lipoprotein, okay? So the take-home message here is that fats, again, are oils. They don't mix with water. Your blood is basically water. So any fat that you eat that has to go to its proper place has to ride a bus. And we have the good bus and the bad bus, okay? All right, so where do they go, these buses, right? So here's your Big Mac or your olive oil with bread, whatever you think you're eating. Um, uh, you chemically digest in your stomach, but then you absorb the nutrients in your lower intestine, and then you end up with whatever is sugars, electrolytes, anything that you eat in your blood. So here's your triglycerides, the stuff that we spoke about like 20 minutes ago. They have to go into your blood. So they go into the right bus, the high density bus. So now they can go in the blood. The lipids, the fats are inside the bus. They don't have to interact with the water. So the oil doesn't have to mix with the water. It just travels very happily. Again, they have AC, nice comfy seats, all good. They go to the liver does his magical thing, and you're good, okay? What trans fats do, and or a diet very high in fats, is that now you are in the bad bus. Now this is a bus that's full of lipids, it's very slow, and instead of ending up in the liver, sometimes it ends up there, sometimes it doesn't. It actually gets stuck in your blood vessels. It will be like too heavy when it's here, and it literally sticks to your blood vessels, okay? And basically starts an inflammatory response, something that, again, Dr. Benito mentioned in her webinar. So your immune system gets there, you have damage, and you end up with what histologists call a plaque. You may have heard that term before. So this is a blood vessel, the inside of a blood vessel. And now, instead of the pipe inside being nice and empty, well, not empty, there's blood in it, okay? Now you have a lot of it plugged with gunk. Fatty acids, fat, lipids, inflammation, and we call that a plaque, okay? Now, every time your heart beats, your vasculature expands a little bit and contracts. You need that flexibility or elasticity to your vasculature. This makes your arteries hard. They don't have that flexibility anymore. So that's where this term comes from that you may have seen, hardening or the hardening of the arteries. Arteriosclerosis. That's what that means. Okay. And now you have this injury. Now think when you water your garden, you have your hose and you have a hose that is this diameter and there's liquid going through there. What do you think is going to happen if I close down half of that hose, but the liquid is going at the same rate? What's going to happen to the pressure inside the hose? It's going to increase. And that's where the high blood pressure comes from. Okay. So it's a long explanation, but basically this tells you the connection between trans fats and a high lipid diet to heart disease and atherosclerosis. It's a direct correlation, which means that when you go to your doctor for your annual physical and they do your lipid profiles, again, if you are a certain age, if I did this 20 years ago, I got this number, total cholesterol. But now they give you all these other numbers, and now you know what they mean, okay? You get the triglycerides, that's your total fat that you're eating. You have your total cholesterol, the one that you're eating and the one that you're making because you're animals. Again, the term of endearment, animals. And they also tell you which bus they're in. And sometimes they give you the ratio. So next time you get your blood done at your annual physical, look at those numbers. That's what they mean. They're telling you how much fat you have in your blood, but more important, what bus are they in? So somebody with maybe a borderline high cholesterol, but you see that most of it is here, that person is actually not at risk for cardiovascular disease. 20 years ago, if you have 220 cholesterol, you were going to die next week. But now they look at this first, okay? The other thing that is important is, and I feel funny telling this to this group, but diet makes a difference. Nutrition makes a difference. And not to bash any pharmaceutical companies, but again, going back 20 years ago, if you were here for cholesterol, they gave you Lipitor, made by Pfizer. It made them more than $1 billion with a B, $1 billion, okay? If you're a middle-aged man and you look like me, you only see me from here up, which is good because I have a few extra pounds somewhere else in my body. And if I was here, I will be given Lipitor, which is actually a very harsh medication. But you can change all those numbers with diet, with nutrition. I feel funny telling this to this group, but you'll be surprised how many people don't know this. I have a very good friend of mine and colleague, her husband, sort of my age, active physically, and he did trifecta. He was overweight, became insulin dependent, insulin resistant diabetic, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, 5 medications. Big Italian family, he loved his pasta. So the wife said, "S'acabó, finito with the pasta." Switched to like wheat type of pastas instead of the white ones. Long story short, 2 weeks of changing diet, exercise with a trainer, all those numbers went down. All those numbers went down. So the diabetes went away, cholesterol went to normal, and he went from 5 medications to only 2 for the high blood pressure, half the dose. And that was just with change in lifestyle and behavior. Again, I feel funny telling you this because you know this, but that's what it is. The last one, it's completely different topic, but it'll take me just 5 minutes because it's really, really important. It has to do with also lipids and also something that Dr. Benito, I saw she's also interested in, and that is the toxins in the environment, especially biotoxins. And that has to do with steroids. We're not going to cover steroids at all, but I'm just going to tell you about one. I'm showing you the structures to show you that they look alike. They look like cholesterol. That's what we talk about blah, 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 lipids and so on. But here are the ones I want you to just look at. Here's progesterone. And from that, your body either makes estradiol if you're a female or testosterone if you're a male. And this is actually estrogen. Now, this is not a binary thing. If you're a female, you still need a little bit of testosterone, and you're a male, you need a little bit of estrogen. But the reason I'm mentioning this is some of you may have heard about this, the epidemic of early puberty in young girls. Has anybody heard of this? Okay, so the idea was that, or the theory was that xenoestrogen, xeno means a different species, like xenophobia, so on. So what this meant is, okay, is that epidemic of early puberty due to xenoestrogen? Estrogens are coming from other places. And sadly, the answer is yes. Okay. Again, short version of the story, massive amounts of estrogens are used in livestock farming. Okay. And the reason is that they increase the animal growth rate, efficiency, they convert the feed into meat. So basically, you get more meat for the cow, if you want to call it that way. The cows make more milk and so on and so on. Okay. The problem is that the estrogen that you give those cows ends up in the milk. The milk, whole milk, as you probably know, is very oily. There's a lot of lipid and fats in uh, cow milk. So the estrogens and the hormones end up there. Um, Bioactive estrogen is found all over the place. Bioactive means that if it comes into your body, it will have an effect. Okay. Proteins don't last a long time. So you may find proteins in the soil or water or whatever, but they're not going to be bioactive. But hormones will be bioactive. To make a long story short, if it wasn't even bad enough, a lot of pesticides from the organochloride family, that's DDT. Sure, you have heard about DDT before. They also have an estrogen-like effect. So you have all these things in the environment. And to make a long story short, by drinking the milk from cows that have been given a lot of estrogen, from eating the meat or just being exposed to soil that contains the pesticides and the toxins. And we also have forgot to mention runoff and water tables. Runoff is when you use all the water, a lot of water in a commercial setting, in a farm, agriculture. And by farms, I'm talking the big industrial ones, not your little plot or what my wife has on the side of the house. I'm talking like thousands of animals and so on. That water runs off somewhere. That can be a creek that then becomes a river, goes into the river, so on, or it permeates through the soil into the water table, which is the water under the soil. That's the water that we drink. That's the water that we use out of our hoses to put into our own gardens and so on. So runoff and water tables are a problem. You can be miles away, 20, 30 miles away. And this was shown in North Carolina. It's a big case study there. There was a pig farm. The runoff affected people 20 miles downstream. So anyway, so now we have all these hormones in the water table, and that is a problem. It's been shown that can induce early puberty in young girls, and largely this is growing of breasts. So you have girls that are 9, 10 years old and have grown full breasts, and you can imagine the social and just psychological effects of that. And there's a difference. Some of them just enter puberty, all of it, but some of them just grow the breast, and that is the very bad problem. Last slide, what about policy? The European Union and other countries have banned the use of estradiol way back in 1989. But as you can imagine here, we have different rules. So we allow everything, natural, synthetic, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So the FDA allows the use of any of those in any livestock farming. So that brings to the almost last point, which is, okay, how can you avoid this? Usually when I teach these classes or my students, they ask me, what do you think? And I usually don't give my own opinion. I let people make my own opinion. But for this one, the only thing that I tell them is when our daughters were younger and we live in Connecticut, we used to drive 30 miles to Stu Leonard's. I don't know if anybody has heard of Stu Leonard's, because there were the place that we knew had hormone-free milk, and we only will get milk from that store. So anyway, the problem now that we have is that there's a lot of confusion with labels and certifications, and I'm sure you're all aware of this. There's a difference between grass-fed, organic. There's a lot of phrases that people use that sometimes overlap, but sometimes they don't. It's just like your question from earlier, how do you know bioavailability? when somebody tells you that they're grass-fed, they can still be fed hormones on the side. So you have to be careful with those labels. And to make matters worse, and I learned this relatively recent from a friend of mine, if you're a very small farm, we're talking, these are the little, family farms, 10 acres, you're doing your own thing. Certifications can be expensive. So you can be growing your own hormone-free chickens or so on, but you don't have the money to buy there's groups that can come to your farm and audit you and see what you do and then give you a certification. They cannot afford it. So they could be hormone-free, grass-fed, everything, but they cannot prove it to you. So I wish there was an easier, cheaper way for them to be able to do this. So I know it has nothing to do with trans fats, but this is also a real problem when it comes to biotoxins. I tell people that GMOs, genetically modified organisms, I don't care about as long as I know what the modification was. But this and antibiotics in food is the one that I really worry about. And with that happy note, um, there's question in the chat box. Can you explain what statins actually do to lower LDLCs? Short version of that is I'm trying to think of the short version. Statins are a family of molecules that affect your cardiovascular health. And what they do is that they deal with the surface. They do changes in the surface of the cells that line up. That's what I'm going like this, line up your blood vessels. So one of the things that they do is that they keep the elasticity going. Somebody with cardiovascular issues will get, again, the optimal will be you get your statins, but you also get your nutritional behavioral changes. Is there a resource we can look at which tests? I cannot make that up. Test oils. That will test oils. I have no clue, to be honest, but I will make a note and try to look it up. If you go to nih.gov, that's the main page for the National Institutes of Health. Yes, I cannot spell 3 letters. Sorry about that. They are divided into institutes, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and so on. There's actually one for nutrition. And all those references that I gave you about the omega-3s, for example, that I gave you, that's where I found them. And you can actually look at summaries made for lay people. There's also the papers for the scientists. Some question, most avocado oils don't contain avocados. That's actually correct. A lot of the oils are synthetic because they're very easy chemically to be made. Okay, and here's where we get into the question: if I make an artificial molecule of fructose, it will taste sweet. It will taste just like the one that comes out of fruits. So is it natural or synthetic? The problem is if they keep it the way you find it in nature, which some of those oils do, then yeah, it did not come from avocados, but it will be the same thing. The problem is that they sometimes change them. And last time we talked about sugars and carbohydrates, we talked about fructose, how the natural fructose gets chemically changed into that high fructose corn syrup. That's very nasty and bad for you. So the problem with those oils that are synthetic, and again, they won't tell you they're synthetic. You have to go and dig in to see how they make it. That's a great question. By the way, one of my favorite ones too is, I did not mention this earlier, but cholesterol, only animals need it. So I love it when like a jar of peanut butter will put a big label, cholesterol free. It's always been cholesterol free because it's a plant, so anyway. But I will look into those questions. If you can save the chat box for me, and I will follow up with that.
Okay. So I guess when you were talking about the process of the LDL and the HDL buses and the liver,
yes.
when people talk about a fatty liver.
Actually, yes. I forgot to mention that one. But yeah, if a lot of the bad bosses get stuck in here, that's fatty liver.
Okay.
Um, that's
And
exactly.
go ahead.
No, no, you go ahead.
And so is it the same types of fat, just the volume? No, it's the, right? I mean, if you eat, let's say you just, you just eat a lot of olive oil,
Yeah.
only olive oil, a
Uh,
lot of olive oil.
it will do an effect, but it will have to be a lot of it.
Okay.
Um, and that's a key point that trans fats just accelerate this happening.
Okay.
But you can have a plain old, I shouldn't say plain old, but a high fat diet, and it's the same thing.
Okay.
Uh, you'll end up with a fatty liver,
Okay.
among other things.
Right. So the question, what is in avocado oil then?
Well, there's two ways to get an oil out of a food. One is the old-fashioned way of squishing it. I'm not trying to be funny, but you squish it and squish it, and you get, and then you do a chemical separation. That's very easy because again, oils don't mix with water. So if you homogenize, to use a better word than just squishing, um, those plant sources and then separate them. The oil is the oil, separates from the water, from the aqueous phase is the fancy term that we use. And then what people do, what scientists have done a long time ago, is, I should not do this because there's a lot of clicks, but I'm now committed, is figure out these chemical structures. And then in the lab, you can make the same chemical structure, and then you can sell it. So
Okay.
and actually, that's what supplements are. Supplements is you make these structures in the lab, and you make them in a gel form that you can take as a pill, and that's what you're having. They're not taking like pounds of fish and squishing the fish and getting the oils from them. But again, if the structure is the same and they have nothing else, then it's fine. It's as you're eating it. Um,
So it's a synthetic version.
yes. Yeah. I make a difference between synthetic and artificial. Synthetic means you're making it in the lab. Artificial means it doesn't exist in nature.
Okay.
So high fructose corn syrup is both synthetic and artificial. That's why artificial sweeteners, that's what they have to be called.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
artificial sweeteners. Because a honey is a natural sweetener, for example.
Okay.
Um, and that's why margarine has to be called margarine. You cannot call it butter. And that's what the people who came out, one of the most brilliant naming in all of marketing is the people who came out with the name, I can't believe it's not butter.
Yeah,
Because
right.
by law, you cannot say that it's butter, but you can say, I can't believe it's not butter.
You can put butter in the name.
It's
So
still a trans fat. And by the way, the reason restaurants love the trans fats is because they're solids. And again, this sounds kind of nasty, but because they're artificial, they don't really go bad. There's nothing that eats them, like microorganisms. So you can have your cans of Crisco, and that will never go bad. Um, and it's solid. You can leave it at room temperature. You don't have to worry about refrigerating them and so on. So it's very economically convenient for restaurants to have a lot of trans fats around. And they make great curly fries, but
right.
I will avoid them.
I know.
So,
All right. Well, this has been really informative and explained a lot. I now can definitely know my LDL, my HDL, which I was always like, wait, what?
yeah.
So, so this
Yeah,
is,
I still remember the time where you ate an egg, you're going to die.
and you ate an egg, you were going to die, right?
It's where is that cholesterol actually?
Yeah, yeah, and and just the the what kinds of just chemicals and well not chemical but just toxins that go into our food just it comes right through to us. So
Yeah, and I know we're out of time, but people have been finding psychoactive medicines in our water now because people, when you're done with your medicines, people will just flush them down the toilet or just throw them out, and then your garbage can gets wet. The medicine gets dissolved and they go into those water tables. So now a lot of counties, I think Mercer County does this, and I know my pharmacy also does this. If you're done with your prescription, you don't need any more pills, you bring the pills back. You don't flush them down because
right.
they stay bioactive.
This has been really helpful. Thank you so much. If
Oh, thank you
anybody
again.
has any other questions for James Martinet, he's shared with us his email address, and I will be sending out these slides to you when we get them, when you're ready to get them out. And I hope to see everybody at another webinar. I'm working on designing what our next programs are going to be looking like, and hope to see you there. And everybody stay safe and be well.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Stay safe.